Gave my parents a luxurious one-week trip to Europe with me, but they took my jobless sister instead. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The words my mother had just spoken echoed in my head like a cruel joke. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately and really needs this trip." The trip I had planned. The trip I had paid for. The trip that was supposed to be for me and my parents. And now, in the dim glow of the early morning, I stood watching as my younger sister Lauren dragged her expensive designer suitcase toward my car, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her tone dripping with artificial gratitude. I looked at my father, searching for something, anything, that resembled guilt or shame. But all he did was avoid my eyes as he handed me his suitcase, like a man who wanted no part in the inevitable confrontation. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to remain composed. "This was supposed to be our trip, something for me to share with you." "It still is," my mother said brightly, completely ignoring the hurt radiating from me. "Just with Lauren instead." Lauren, who had contributed absolutely nothing to this trip. Lauren, who had always managed to insert herself into moments that were supposed to be mine. Lauren, the golden child who never had to ask for anything because it was always handed to her. The realization hit me like a gut punch. It didn't matter how much effort I put in. It didn't matter how much money I saved, how much I planned, how much I wanted to share this with them. In their eyes, Lauren would always come first. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to smile. If they wanted to take Lauren instead of me, fine. They could go, but I wasn't about to let them enjoy this trip at my expense. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice eerily calm as I opened the trunk. The drive to the airport was suffocating. Lauren babbled on about shopping in Paris, about TikToks she'd seen of the city, about how excited she was. My mother responded with equal enthusiasm. My father sat in the back, silent, like he wished he was anywhere but here. At one point he cleared his throat. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual." I let out a dry laugh. "Unusual? That's an interesting way to put it." Lauren leaned forward, resting her chin on the front seat. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go instead. I could never have afforded this on my own." I clenched my jaw. "Enjoy the trip." "Lauren," I said through gritted teeth. By the time we reached the airport, my patience was hanging by a thread. My mother pulled me into a quick hug. "Thank you for understanding. Sweetheart, this means a lot to us. And to Lauren." I nodded stiffly, stepping back as they walked toward the terminal. And then I drove home, alone, furious. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the steering wheel like I wanted to. Instead, I parked in my driveway, walked inside, and opened my laptop. I logged into every single account I had used to book that trip. Hotel reservations, canceled. Tours, refunded. First-class airline upgrades, nope. I stared at the confirmation emails stacking up in my inbox, feeling the weight of betrayal slowly lifting. Let them explain themselves to the front desk staff in Paris. Let them scramble to fix things without me. I was done being their doormat. The calls started as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed incessantly, but I ignored it as I unpacked the suitcase I had packed so carefully for a trip I would never take. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then the text messages came. "Mom, Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me immediately." "Mom, Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this now." A laugh bubbled out of me before I could stop it. Fix this? They really thought I'd swoop in and save the day after what they'd done? The phone buzzed again. "Lauren." I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, full of entitlement, filled the speaker. "Violet, this is so petty. We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it. Now." I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years, I had been the one to smooth things over, to make things easier, to ensure everyone was comfortable. Not anymore. I finally decided to answer one of my mother's calls just to stop the incessant ringing. Her voice hit me like a tidal wave of frustration the second I picked up. "Violet, what did you do?" "The hotel says the reservation was canceled, and none of the tours are booked anymore." I let her rant for a moment, her voice rising in pitch as she spiraled into full-blown panic. Then, when she finally paused for breath, I replied, completely calm, I canceled them. Silence. A stunned, choking kind of silence that was almost more satisfying than if she had kept yelling. Why would you do that? She finally hissed. Oh, I don't know, I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip. You're lucky I even drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand, she snapped. Understand what? I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. That my years of saving and planning didn't matter because Lauren needed a break? That my hard work meant nothing to you? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand. And I don't care to. I hung up before she could respond. My phone buzzed again immediately. This time I turned it off and tossed it onto the couch. The silence that followed was bliss. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. They wanted to prioritize Lauren? Fine. But they could figure out the rest of the trip without me. The calls and texts continued over the next few days. At first, I ignored them. I spent my time catching up on work, going for long walks, and doing things that actually made me happy for once. But curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I skimmed through the unread messages. Mom, Violet, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears and your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. Lauren, you're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already. Dad, we need to talk. This isn't right. I set the phone down, shaking my head. For years, I had been the one to fix things, to make sure they were comfortable, they were happy. And now that I had finally stepped back, they didn't know how to handle it. The next call came minutes later. Against my better judgment, I answered. This isn't funny anymore, my mother barked before I could even say hello. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of my tea. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail, and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. Stop being dramatic, she snapped. Lauren needed this more than you. And now she can figure it out, I said flatly. You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me? Fine, but don't expect me to fund her vacation. We're family, she hissed. We don't do this to each other. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. In the background, I heard Lauren groan. Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible. That was the final straw. Enjoy your trip, I said icily. Oh, wait, you can't because it's not your trip. It was mine. And now it's nobody's. Goodbye. I hung up. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of anger and relief. Anger that they had put me in this position. Relief that I had finally stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't letting them take advantage of me. The next few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone turned off, I finally had space to think clearly, free from the barrage of guilt trips and accusations. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. My afternoons were filled with work and small projects I had been putting off. Things that reminded me how capable I was when I wasn't constantly trying to meet my family's impossible expectations. But by the third day, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on, fully expecting another storm of texts and voicemails. I wasn't wrong. The first few were from my mother, her messages growing increasingly hysterical with each one. Violet, you need to call me back right now. This has gone too far. I can't believe you're doing this. You've humiliated us. We're your parents. How could you treat us this way? Then there was Lauren, predictably entitled as ever. This is so petty, even for you. You're ruining everything. Just fix it. Violet, and finally my dad. Quieter, but no less pointed. Violet, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can sort this out. I hesitated before listening to the final voicemail, a long one from my mom. Her voice was quieter this time, tinged with frustration and exhaustion. Violet, she began, we're back at the airport now. The trip is ruined, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Your sister is devastated, and your father and I are, well, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. Call us when you're ready to talk. I deleted the voicemail without replying. I wasn't ready to talk. And honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't just about one trip. It was the culmination of years of them putting Lauren first and expecting me to be okay with it. This trip had been the breaking point, but the cracks had been forming for a long time. That evening, Grace stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an unmistakable look of curiosity. "I heard about what happened," she said, setting the coffee on my table. "Your mom called me yesterday." Of course she had. My mother had always been good at recruiting allies when she wanted to guilt me back into line. "And?" I asked, taking a sip. Grace shrugged, a sly smile creeping across her face. "I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're the best." "No, you're the best," she said, her tone suddenly serious, "because you finally stood up for yourself." "I know how hard that is, Violet. Don't let them drag you back down." Her words stuck with me long after she left. Grace was right. I had spent too long bending over backward to please people who never seemed to care about my efforts. It was time to break that cycle once and for all. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was joined by something new: freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations. Freedom from being the family's fixer. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. But as expected, the silence didn't last. It was Sunday afternoon when I got the call. I finally decided to answer. This time it was my dad. "Violet," he began, his voice heavy with weariness, "your mom wanted me to call. She thinks you'll listen to me." I leaned back in my chair. "Go on," he sighed. "And look, this has all gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset, Lauren's furious, and, well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this." I stiffened, my grip tightening around the phone. "Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It's just, you've always been the reasonable one. The one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're right. It's not like me, because for once, I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess." He paused, and for a moment, I thought he might finally see my side of things. But then he said, "You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair?" I exhaled sharply. Fair," I repeated, my voice rising. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Mom decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Lauren like I didn't matter?" "That's not what we were trying to do," he said, his tone defensive. "We just thought Lauren needed it more." "Of course you did," I snapped. "You always think she needs more. More attention, more support, more of everything. And I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her. Not anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he said, "I don't know what you want me to say." "I don't need you to say anything," I replied, my voice steady. "I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first." "Violet." "Goodbye, Dad." I ended the call. For the rest of the day, I let myself feel everything. The anger, the sadness, the relief. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the start of something new. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore. And I wasn't going to be. They could figure out how to clean up their own messes. When my parents and Lauren finally returned from their disastrous trip, I was waiting for them, not to greet them, but to watch. I had parked in their driveway sipping coffee, feeling surprisingly calm as I watched their taxi pull up. As they stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them, their faces were a mix of exhaustion and irritation. Lauren was the first to speak. "Well, I hope you're happy." "Violet," I raised an eyebrow, staying seated on the porch swing. "Happy about what?" "Our trip was a disaster," my mom snapped, waving her hand as if to brush the whole thing away. "We spent the entire week staying in dingy hotels and eating terrible food because we couldn't afford anything decent. And don't get me started on the tours." Lauren crossed her arms. "Oh, wait, there weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation?" I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting their complaints wash over me like background noise. I had expected this. "Sounds rough," I said finally, my voice calm. "But you wanted to take Lauren, remember? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time." "That's not the point," my mom shot back, her voice rising. "You knew we couldn't afford all the things you planned. You set us up to fail." I stood up, setting my mug down on the small table next to me. No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for us. Something special, something I had been saving for years. You're the ones who decided to cut me out at the last second. My dad finally spoke, his tone quieter but no less accusatory. You didn't have to cancel everything, Violet. That was extreme. Was it? I asked, folding my arms. Why should I have paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? If Lauren needed it so badly, you should have planned it yourselves. You're lucky I didn't cancel your return flight too. Lauren rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic. It's just money, Violet. And you're so entitled, I shot back, my patience finally snapping. Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume things magically appear for you because someone else takes care of it? They stood there, stunned into silence. I've spent years being the responsible one, I continued, my voice steady but firm. The one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly. And you've spent just as long taking it all for granted. That's not fair, my mom started, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, Mom. What's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Lauren over me, like always. So I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine. But you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me. I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned to leave. I'm glad you're back safely, I said over my shoulder. But don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done. As I walked to my car, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt. But I didn't look back. The drive home from my parents' house felt strange, peaceful. For years, every visit had left me emotionally drained. But this time, I felt lighter. I had finally said everything I had been holding in. And for once, I wasn't worried about their reaction. When I got back to my house, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch, replaying the confrontation in my head. They had been so sure I would fold that I would give in like always. But watching their stunned faces as I walked away was a reminder of just how much I had changed. They could be angry, they could be hurt, they could be embarrassed. It didn't matter anymore. I was done living my life to meet their expectations. The next day I got a call from Grace. How'd it go? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I laughed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. Exactly like you'd imagine. They're furious, Lauren's pouting, and Mom is probably trying to figure out how to guilt me back into line. Grace let out a snort. Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place. I grinned, grateful for her unwavering support. Thanks, Grace. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this. Anytime, she said, her voice softening. So, what's next for you? Now that you're not playing family fixer anymore? That question had been circling in my mind since the confrontation. What was next? For years, so much of my energy had been poured into trying to please my family, trying to earn their approval. Now that I had let go of that burden, the possibilities felt endless and a little intimidating. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I feel like I get to decide. Not them. Not anyone else, just me. Sounds like the start of something amazing, Grace said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt big in their own way. I redecorated my living room, swapping out the hand-me-down furniture from my parents for pieces that felt uniquely mine. I spent weekends exploring local cafes and parks, things I had always meant to do but never made time for. And I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and dreams without filtering them through the lens of what anyone else might think. Each small step felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I had lost. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I had used to plan the trip. The canceled reservations stared back at me, and I didn't feel a pang of regret. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. Closing the spreadsheet, I opened a new browser tab and typed, solo travel ideas. A few weeks after my parents' return, I booked a solo trip to Italy. It wasn't the same itinerary I had planned for them, and it wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to celebrate my independence and finally put myself first. The moment I landed in Rome, I felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. I had never traveled alone before, but as I stepped out of the airport and into the bustling city, I knew I had made the right decision. The last evening in Italy felt surreal. I stood on the balcony of my hotel, looking down at the cobbled streets illuminated by the soft golden glow of the streetlights. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh pastries from the bakery below. I held my journal in one hand, my pen hovering over the page. For the first time in my life, I wasn't writing about trying to prove myself, about trying to fit into a family that had never made space for me. Instead, I wrote about freedom, about self-worth, about the power of choosing myself over the expectations of others. Back home, things were different. My parents' messages had softened, shifting from anger to quiet, forced politeness. Lauren had gone silent after her initial tantrums, her wounded pride keeping her from reaching out. I had expected guilt trips, manipulations, desperate attempts to make me feel like the villain, but instead I was met with the realization that they didn't know how to approach me anymore. Without my constant sacrifices, without my role as their fixer, they were lost. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard whispers of what had happened after their return. Their trip had not just been inconvenient, it had been humiliating. Struggling with budget hotels, canceled plans, and last-minute scrambling, they had been forced to face their own entitlement. Lauren, especially, had taken it hard. She had spent years believing that things would always work out for her, that someone would always clean up the mess, and when no one did, she had been forced to experience for the first time what it felt like to be truly on her own. My mother, I was told, had started making excuses to family friends, spinning a version of events that painted her as the well-meaning parent caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding. My father had remained quiet, embarrassed that his attempts to downplay the situation had only left them looking foolish. As for Lauren, she had tried to blame me, of course, but it hadn't landed the way she had hoped. People had begun to see her for what she was, and that was something she couldn't stand. The real punishment wasn't what I had done to them. It was what they had done to themselves. I had spent my whole life believing that if I just worked harder, if I just gave more, if I just let a few more things go, they would finally see me. But they had seen me all along. They had just never valued me the way I deserved. That was no longer my problem. And as I sat there on my last night in Italy, looking at the life I had started to build for myself, I realized that I didn't need closure from them. Their regret, their shame, their discomfort, that was for them to deal with. I had found my own closure in the life I was creating, in the space I had finally given myself to grow, in the quiet realization that I had won. The lesson in all of this was simple. Sometimes walking away isn't about revenge. It's about showing yourself that you were never the problem to begin with. So, what do you think? Did Violet do the right thing? Should she have forgiven them, or was her decision to walk away the best choice? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because this story isn't over yet. There's always more to tell.